Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm happy to welcome in Joe Oliaro, VP of Sales and Chief Real Estate Officer at Wagner Logistics. And we're going to be talking about the state of warehousing. Joe, first of all, welcome into the show, but did I just butcher your last name?
Well, you were pretty darn close. I'll give you that.
Okay.
I've heard Oliaro. I've heard all kinds of stuff. So it's same stuff, different day. That's what I've started having to do is put my name phonetically next to my signature line, and that typically helps people out. But you're pretty close. Oliaro is yeah.
Oliaro. Okay. So I was kind of close, but not exactly there. And as somebody with a challenging first and last name, I found that even like adding phonetic spelling just doesn't work because people don't even know where to start with mine. So we're in the same boat. Okay, so Joe, for folks who may not be aware of you, of Wagner Logistics, give us kind of a sense of who you are, how you found yourself working in this industry, and then ultimately how you started your company.
Oh man, so Wagner Logistics has been around since 1946, so 77 years. Started out as Wagner Cartage Service, helping with transportation. That morphed into warehousing. And here we are today, occupying roughly 7 million square feet across 24 different markets in the U.S. From 2015 to 2020, we doubled in size, and we're on track to redouble again. And most of that warehousing activities through contract logistics in support of manufacturing groups that they basically have us run the DC for them. They bring in raw materials. We store those in the DC. We shuttle them to the manufacturer or the factory. Finished goods come back out, and then we hold them there and then send them on down the supply chain. So that's kind of where we've made our bones in the warehousing industry, and we've been a running and successful top 100 3PL for the last 21 years.
Nice. And so it's to give, I guess, folks kind of an understanding of what your, I guess, customer segments look like. Is it any refrigerated warehouses, temperature controlled, anything like that, or is it mainly just those manufacturing supplies?
It's mainly just those manufacturing suppliers. We're heavy in the paper industry. We worked in automotive. We work in the energy sector. We worked with plastics in the past, and most of the warehouses are ambient, so we don't have any cold storage facilities or anything like that. But we've kind of found a niche in what we do, and it's a lot of pallet in, pallet out type activity, and we've become incredibly efficient at that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super interesting because I would just imagine that I guess I can't really imagine, because that was going to be my next question, is kind of give us a baseline of, because over the last few years, I don't have to tell anybody that listens to the show or even you that, obviously the market has changed dramatically. It's like a pendulum that's shifting from back and forth. With the rise of, e-commerce deliveries during the last few years, overwhelming demand for warehouse space, give us a sense of what the warehouse market looked like before all of this craziness entered the market.
So manufacturers, shippers loved just-in-time inventory prior to the pandemic. They loved having a minimal warehouse footprint. And as soon as the pandemic hit, their volume, or I guess their demand, increased, by 30% in some cases. So it was immediately their just-in-time inventory was immediately depleted, and they had to come up with another solution. And so the warehouse market was already tight. And so they had to figure something out. They said, well, let's go and find some 3PL partners that might be able to set aside some space or help us with more efficiency to create more space within our warehouse or in their warehouse. And so we've been dealing with that level of demand for the last couple of years, and it's created a paradigm shift in how these companies look at their supply chain, and it's really put a spotlight on the value of procurement, and best practices for supply chain managers across the country.
And so when we think about, everything that was, I guess the just in time model to, fast forward to today, is it kind of safe to say that they don't necessarily need that model anymore?
Yes. Well, I don't know if they don't need that model anymore. They still want that model, but they also want extra overflow space and extra, maybe what we call it, an extra 30 days of inventory
Hmm.
on hand, so that they have that much extra time to react to fluctuations in the market and demand.
And
And
so,
I think there's still a lot of things in question too, as far as how consumers are starting to shake out of this. Um, so.
yeah, because it almost feels like it's still, it put e-commerce on steroids for a while, which, just created this massive amount of storage demand for a lot of these retailers out here. But I imagine a lot of that has sort of settled in, but it's still, this settling in is still significantly higher than 2019 levels. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think here in the last year and going forward, we're there, people are starting to talk about an influx of onshoring back to the US, which is going to have a major effect on jobs, on the vacancy for industrial warehouse across the country. And just another another bone to throw, or another monkey wrench to throw in the engine to cause further disruption.
Let's actually dive into that a little bit more, because I'm actually really fascinated with that, the nearshoring and efforts that are going on within manufacturing. What is the current space level of space that's available? If I'm a retailer, if I'm a manufacturer and I'm looking for space, is it easy to come by, or is it very challenging and expensive to come by?
So, so if you're looking in the top 50 markets across the country, you are most likely at a sub 5% vacancy. Now, what that means is there's less than 5% of the industrial product in that market available and vacant, ready for a tenant. Now, if you're looking in Dallas, I was just in Dallas a couple weeks ago, and if you're planning to take down a warehouse space, or if you're a 3PL looking to service a contract, the timing of that is critical, because there's so much product, industrial product, coming out of the ground, that if you're looking for it tomorrow, there might be something available today. But if you're trying to plan for Q4, you might be in trouble, because you don't know exactly what's going to come out of the ground. You don't know exactly what's going to be available. And frankly, you don't know what rates are going to look like. Let's see, if you're in the Inland Empire, there's virtually no space available. And so we've started looking to buildings that are closer to our facilities in like Tracy and Stockton, where the rates aren't as crazy. There is some sort of availability, and it's not a top 50 market, but it's close enough from a tertiary standpoint to say, hey, we can probably meet your needs here, and save you some money on occupancy costs. And then, as far as onshoring goes, over the next 5 years, there are 68 metro markets in the US and Canada that will see an additional 10 million square feet or more of new industrial facilities. And that's mainly manufacturing. And so cities in the Sun Belt and Midwest that are close to rail and port facilities are most likely to keep or see these types of developments. So you're going to see a shift away from the East and West Coast. And I think you're going to see a major influx of manufacturing activity, into the Midwest and that area. I saw a map of mega projects across the U.S., and it's even siloed into these lithium ion batteries, automotive, data centers, which aren't necessarily for warehousing, but it's taking up a lot of the bandwidth for large space that could be used for fulfillment or warehouse distribution.
And so what happens whenever you're noticing, you as a company versus, a manufacturer, if they notice, the 5% or less amount of space that you can, actively use right now, versus the demand that's coming in the future, why wouldn't a lot of these manufacturers just build their own warehouse? I imagine there's much more to it, but that's where I was hoping that you can kind of clarify on why they wouldn't.
Why they wouldn't do onshoring or
Or why they wouldn't build their own, say they see all the complexities that are going on in the market right now. If they maybe want to guarantee that flexibility in the future, why wouldn't they just go out and buy up their own land and buy up their own, or build up their own warehouse?
Well, I think that's what a lot of these manufacturers are doing. They're going out and finding land in the Midwest. You got. I'll use Kansas City for example. On east and west of Kansas City proper, you've got nothing but farmland and nothing but developable space. The challenge with building out warehouse in conjunction with that, especially from a developer standpoint, is construction costs. Available labor for construction, materials, and lead time on materials and equipment is killer. And so what we're seeing now is developers saying, hey, we're going to cut our pipeline of development activity relative to warehouse in half. And we're going to go from a $500 billion development pipeline to 250 across the country. And it's almost a paradox because you've got all this incoming demand of manufacturers who will need warehouse. But then you've also got all these challenges from labor, construction costs, material lead times that are working against building warehouse to facilitate that need. So I don't know where that lands, but it's going to be an interesting, next 2 or 3 years to see how that all shakes out.
It's almost like that maybe some of the home builders, it may be very similar to what's going on in like home construction, where a lot of the home builders are limiting construction because demand is falling. But there's, a lot of, intricacies within each of those different segments. But it kind of sounds like both of them are trying to control their own supply and demand, or maybe manufacture that supply and demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where you're going to see a shift would potentially be, taking abandoned properties. So manufacturers could take abandoned facilities closer to the urban core and redeveloping those, taking old, functionally obsolete warehouses and raising the roof, literally raising the roof 5 feet to make it more marketable, to make it more functional. And that in some cases that's more cost effective than tearing down and rebuilding a space or going out and doing a build to suit.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Why only 5 feet? Why wouldn't they extend it, maybe another, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet?
Sorry, you broke up there for a second.
Oh, I was asking why only 5 feet? Why wouldn't they extend it maybe like 30 or 40 feet?
I think we've reached a point the maximum today, but I think 5-6 years ago they said, well, we'll never go over 32 feet. We'll never have a need for that. But now you see cold storage facilities that have well over 40 feet, and it's completely automated. The robots know where to go. They go up the thing, they grab the frozen food or whatever it is, bring it back down, and send it on out. So it's all demand driven. All, hey, how can we remove the the labor element out of this as well? And it's funny. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but so in Arizona, 15-20 years ago, there was a substantial amount of industrial product out there. It's a great centralized location to service California, which is typically more expensive, more regulated. So Phoenix, Arizona is perfect for facilitating stuff into California. And what's happened, the product out there it went from only 20% had maybe HVAC in the warehouses. And in some cases, they'd use something like a swamp cooler that was very an antique way of cooling off a warehouse. Now it's completely flipped, and now maybe 20% is left like that. And now you've got 80% of the industrial market properties in Arizona that are, heated and cooled. And it's not because of the products that they're storing. We know it's hot in Phoenix, Arizona. It's not because of the products, it's because of the labor. That's the only way they can get employees to come in and work in those buildings, because it's just too hot. And so we're also seeing a shift in how you cater to labor. And if you can spend an extra, $100,000 a year and increase your retention by 20%, it makes a huge difference.
That's actually interesting. I wouldn't have even thought about it from that aspect, but it makes a ton of sense. Like, you're obviously going to face some hiring challenges if your building is over 100 degrees in the summertime. Hardly anyone wants to work in those kind of conditions. And so knowing, sort of the customer expectations, the demand levels of where they are right now and in the coming years, where does Wagner place their bets? Where are they, sort of sitting in the market, and where are they placing their bets for in the future?
So we're taking a targeted approach. We've identified, I'm just going to say 10 different markets across our portfolio where we want to double, triple, quadruple our footprint in those markets. And those are markets where we feel like we have a strong presence, I guess a strong market of manufacturing presence, a decent labor market, and then enough industrial product to give us the ability to have some level of flexibility in our real estate options. And with my background being in real estate, I know that being able to pit landlords against each other is a big deal. And if you're in New Jersey or the Inland Empire, you don't have that option. There are no vacancies. You are at the mercy of the landlord. And there's a lot of good landlords out there, but they're taking what they can today because they might not get it tomorrow. So we're taking that targeted approach into these markets. From a labor standpoint, we've had to shift the way that we appeal to employees, and it's a balance, because we're also trying to fulfill our contracts and complete our service level agreements. And that's required us to go and hire temp services to hire enough employees. We've sped up the hiring process by eliminating initial drug testing up front. And that's a whole thing in of itself, because if you take too long to hire the employee, there's enough demand for that employee out there that if you don't snatch them up that day, you might not get a response back from them at all. And so we've quantified recruiting, just recruiting one warehouse employee is $1,000.
Wow.
So if we're constantly recruiting these folks, it just eats us alive. So we have to get better at not just recruiting, but retaining those employees. So measuring measures to bolster employee satisfaction and improve that retention is, top of our list. And then once we have an employee on, a lot of it's about onboarding, proper training, and giving them a really good orientation to understand what their role is and how they contribute to the success of the company. 30 years ago, warehousemen were big, tough, burly men that moved big sacks of grain around and, hammered boxes together and shipped it on, threw it on a rail car. And that's what it was perceived to be 30 years ago. It's not like that anymore. It's a very diverse community of people that like working in a warehouse, but they also want to have that direction. They want to have that work-life balance. And they want to be recognized for the good things that they do.
And I think too that's sort of shining a light on, just the warehouse workers themselves, the people that are responsible for helping you get those items, within a couple days. I think I heard or I read that Amazon had a memo in the middle of like the COVID pandemic, when e-commerce demand is just skyrocketing high, that they were legitimately worried that they were going to run out of workers that they could potentially, not the workers that they've hired or maybe already hired in the past, but they were legitimately worried that they were going to run out of folks that they could even recruit to come and work inside their warehouses because they have, so many throughout, the country. So how does, how do you even think about competing with, the likes of like an Amazon? I imagine if you treat your employees halfway decent, you're probably half the way there.
Yeah, and statistics would show you that the e-commerce industry in general, and Amazon covers a large portion of that industry. That the e-commerce sector is a meat grinder when it comes to attrition and employee turnover. It's just a constant. I mean, it's almost 50%. So you're constantly seeing new people coming in and out of your facility, and it's incredibly difficult to manage successfully because you're constantly having to retrain and you're having to change the roles to where they're more simplified, more of a push button, hey, go pick this up, put it over there. And that's where some like automation comes into play, because if you can automate the process itself to tell the employees where to go, it takes part of the training out of it. So I think from an e-commerce standpoint, there's more of a demand for automation to make it easier to bring people in because there's so much turnover. From our standpoint, we look at automation and from more of a setting up a roadmap of automation for our customers, rather than trying to address labor issues. So it's more like, hey, we're going to start at, we're not going to fully automate this facility today, but we're going to show you, here's your first step. Here's your long travels within the warehouse. Here's your repetitive moves that we think that we can automate to support and make it a better experience for employees, so that they're able to be cross-trained across different roles. They're able to really understand how the warehouse works without making it too complicated.
Now, I know that, for a lot of your customers, they're more on the manufacturing side of things. So they're probably bigger items, bulkier items, things like, or I guess more awkward, not awkwardly shaped, but you get what I'm saying. It's not a nice and neat little, e-commerce boxes that's great for shipping. So with that in mind, how are you, or maybe not focusing on, like the automation, robotics, things that are, very popular in sort of the e-commerce driven world, but is that really applicable to, the manufacturing side of things?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to what the customer wants, and really what they need to be able to handle. For their volumes and demand. And so in every market, in the top 50, in every market, there's labor challenges, and it really boils down to labor costs. So a lot of 3PLs estimated labor was going to escalate by maybe 5% year over year 5 years ago. It's done more like 8 to 10% a year. So you've had this increase in labor costs, and then you've had a decrease in automation at technology and some of the things that are coming across the table. So you've got these two lines that are going to converge. And the play to our customers is, hey, let's find where that line converges. Let's plan around that specifically. And then we'll be able to put a plan together so that we're mitigating how much you're paying with labor, but we're also not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're able to, rather than have this big dynamic roller coaster of cost, we've got an even keel of cost that still covers the customer's demand.
Which is a smart play, in my opinion, because it's automation only makes sense where it makes sense. I think for a lot of folks, they just want to add automation just for the sake of saying that they have automation, and it's software or processes and technology that is outdated within just a couple of years, and you just spend all that time and energy and money into investing in those platforms and then they're out of date within just a couple of years. And so you kind of have to find that really sweet spot, like you said, of marrying sort of the worker relationship with all of these different technology trends that are coming into the space. And another one of the aspects that you guys tackle, and I was reading, is that you have a sort of a shared relationship between the tenants within the warehouse. Can you kind of speak to, some of the pros and cons of having a tenant relationship, or maybe I guess a roommate situation with a lot of your warehouse clients?
Yeah, so we call it our flexible warehousing solutions, or our multi-customer warehouses. And we've developed a program that allows manufacturers, maybe on a smaller scale, or still a dedicated opportunity, but they're basically sharing the space across a handful of shippers, manufacturers, versus having one dedicated facility. The benefit there is that you're able to take advantage of the shared space. You're taking advantage of shared equipment and shared labor across across that building, across that operation. And so in most cases, there's some level of seasonality across those customers. And so what we're constantly trying to do is reduce that customer's occupancy cost by leveraging complementary customers that will come in. And, like, let's say one customer has an initial build that goes through June, and then they start to deplete their inventory. Well, if we have another customer that has a build that begins in June or July, then it's kind of a yin and yang thing, where we're able to keep concrete covered, and we're able to keep them from paying too much for space.
That makes a ton of sense, because I think that another aspect to it, and I think that's, a good fit for especially a lot of your manufacturing, clients, is the aspect that you guys also build next to, you have a rail component that is a very strong selling point for a lot of your warehouse locations. Why is that, for folks who may not be aware of the advantages of rail?
So rail itself it's been around forever. You can carry 3 to 4 truckloads of product in one rail car. Efficiencies over an intermodal, you're avoiding drayage and box termination, and it's more cost effective over longer distances. And then if the volumes are there with manufacturers, you can save additional on transportation. And the more volume you have, the more the railroad's going to work with you as well. We've known railroads to come in and build a spur knowing that they're going to get a lot more volume from your group specifically. The challenge is that because of the longer lead time on rail transportation, it requires more planning to really realize those savings. So understanding when you need to receive the product and allowing enough time to kind of build that infrastructure into your plan is a big deal.
Yeah, I just actually had a conversation with Martin Liu over at Comtrex, and he was talking about, the incoming benefits, or sort of the future of rail being transloading, and how all of these different components can really help you save a ton of cash on your shipping, which, shipping can be upwards of 50% of your overall, budget for the company overall. And so if you could save just a few percentage points on your shipping costs, by shipping via rail, then that has a significant downstream effect as far as your savings are concerned. And so when you, so say I'm a customer and I want to come and I want to do business with Wagner, and I want you guys to take over, as far as, or maybe not even take over, maybe handle that aspect of, the storage and the shipment of my goods. Where does Wagner play a role? Are you just the real estate location, or are you providing all of those logistics management services, coordinating transportation, coordinating the rail? What are you guys doing, and what do your customers, need the most help with?
So I guess the two main parts of our business would come from sourcing the warehouse, implementing the operation at the warehouse and distribution operation itself, and then also facilitating any transportation needs that would come off of our docks. That's where we really provide a lot of value. Obviously, we have value-added services that would be comparable to any other 3PL. but I feel like we have a competitive advantage on the real estate side, just knowing how those transactions play out, different contacts that we've made throughout the country, and but the means by which we go out and source new real estate opportunities. We kind of have a good rhythm down and a good way of moving quickly to take down space. And a lot of our customers see a lot of value in that because they have to go through a lot of red tape. They have to go through legal. They have to go through all these different things. Especially if they're like a Fortune 500 company to navigate and really negotiate a deal. And if you're taking that long, you put yourself in a position to be competing against other tenants for space. And these days, it makes it really difficult to get a below market or even to try to avoid a horse race for a building, if that's the case.
Well, how are I guess these customers avoiding that? We kind of talked about sort of the crunch as far as space availability, and it's probably only going to get worse from here on out. So how are you helping maybe some of your clients tackle those who maybe are working in an industry that is experiencing an unreal amount of demand, not only now but maybe in the future?
We've taken a look at customers' existing facilities and shown them how to maximize the cube in their warehouse. For instance, we looked at a facility with a customer, and they had normal racking in place or in their plan, and we showed them that by instituting very narrow aisle racking with a certain level of automation, they'd be able to reduce their footprint in that space by 60%. So it's also getting creative with the existing space you have, and then in some cases when we have to go and take down a facility, you might have to settle a little bit for a less than ideal type location, or provide some upfit in the space to make it work or make it be more functional. We've run across a few different locations where the dock doors are not an ideal size, so we had to figure out what that was going to cost to upfit the dock doors, and in some cases it's not cheap.
Oh, yeah, I could imagine that those unforeseen circumstances, those unforeseen costs are probably existing with any new building maybe that you invest in the future. So for folks who may want to continue following the journey as far as warehousing and storage capacity are concerned, what does I guess maybe the next 5 years look like, or is it impossible to even sort of gauge that out right now?
It is tough. I think it's tough to look further out than like 18 months. 5 years, I don't know where we'll be in 5 years.
Right.
But what was I? So I guess sticking on the rail, because I'm all about rail right now. We're always trying to find direct rail serve space. And as far as real estate challenges for the next 5 years, there's already virtually 0% vacancy for rail serve space. And if it comes on the market, it's off the market within a few days in some cases. We were just competing for a space here in Kansas City, and we had to step away because the group they offered a 10-year deal just because it had rail coming to it.
Wow.
So that's a paradox too, because you have rail serve space, direct rail serve warehouse buildings, but from a landlord standpoint, there's no additional value that comes from having rail coming to the building. Appraisers will not grant an additional credit or value to the building because of the rail serve. And so it's crazy to me. But when you have such a niche use of that building with rail coming in, they can't justify adding value to it. Now, if you're asking me for a prediction, I think over the next 5 years, you're going to see that change, and you're going to see intermodal facilities begin to overflow, and you're going to see companies pay a major premium, more so than they are today, for direct rail serve space.
Because it almost sounds like you're allowing yourself to have guaranteed capacity, or at least guaranteed movement of your goods, or the flexibility at
Yeah.
least. That's a little shocking that, the appraiser wouldn't add any value to that. It speaks to maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of the value of something like that, of what it would provide to a building and to an area.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
folks oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I would go and lobby for it, but if they did add value to the property, it would not serve my interests. So.
Right. It would only complicate maybe things for you.
That's
So,
right.
well, actually, how do you guys find out about if a building becomes available, and do you just have to go by and look, or look them up on Google Maps, or how do you do that part of the research process in order to make that
Um,
investment?
we have a really strong real estate partner,
Mm.
and so it's I always real estate's kind of the wild west still. It's like the last remaining frontier of information protection. So it all deals are done on information that's available, and you by knowing more than the landlord, or knowing more than the tenant, you can put yourself in a much better position to win,
Hmm.
and capitalize on that knowledge. So it's always been that way, but the because of depth of distance, because of digital information access, and really better information, it's taken the value of just that one broker knowing what's going on in that market, and so they've had to step it up and provide better reporting on site selection information, like what your state and local tax incentives would be, what the labor markets in that area look like, where uh, 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 where the new buildings are going to come out of the ground, what kind of relationships they have that might give us a first position in negotiations. Um, so it's ever evolving, but it's not just, hey, I know a guy who has a building that I can lease to you. It's gotten more complicated than that.
It almost sounds like you have to hire like private investigators in order to find out,
That's
the scoop on each of these projects.
that's not far off.
All right, Joe. I guess, for folks or customers who may be looking for, storage solutions right now or in the near future, and want to get in touch with Wagner and find out everything that you guys got going on, where can folks, follow more of your work, and maybe, check out your site, and get access to some of that available space?
Yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on our website, wagnerlogistics.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can, yeah, we're out there on the socials, and we're moving and shaking. So always looking to
Awesome. Well, I think this was a really great conversation to have, especially around the Wild Wild West aspect of buying up locations in order to ensure that you at least have some kind of storage capabilities. So appreciate your time, Joe, and love to have you back on the show in the future. Hopefully, the market is in a little bit less of a challenging situation than what we all kind of find ourselves in. But then that's logistics. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me out, and I look forward to revisiting this conversation and me apologizing for how wrong I am. And
Right. I know in the 5 years, I'm going to set a date, and we're going to say, hey, all of these predictions were wrong and these were right, and this is what we're going to bet on in the future.
That's right.
All right, perfect.